He didn't just buy land, he bought a challenge. Pennies for acres, rust for a horizon, and a single signature that made everyone in town smirk. Micah Hale stepped out of the courthouse, the thin manila envelope clutched tight against his side. The sun was brutal, baking the cracked steps beneath his boots. The paper inside rustled softly with each breath of wind, as if whispering a secret only he could hear. His name was there, typed in black ink. Real, solid, undeniable. Across the street, two men leaned casually against a battered pickup. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. One spat into the dirt. The other tilted his head and smirked. Their faces said everything. Fool. Micah didn't look back. He simply walked to his own truck, feeling the weight of their stares burn into his shoulders. The town had always seen him as an outsider. A pair of hands, nothing more. When someone's roof caved in during a storm, they called Micah. When a tractor broke down mid-harvest, they called Micah. But when the work was done, the nods stopped. The doors stayed closed. He had grown up like that, always passing through. His parents moved wherever the work was, never staying long enough to plant roots. Childhood for Micah wasn't baseball games or swimming holes. It was heavy sacks of grain, blisters, the smell of sweat and soil baked into every shirt he owned. Permanence was for other families, not his. Now, for the first time, permanence had his name printed on it. This land wasn't worth much. No one else wanted it. But it was his. That thought filled him with a quiet fire that burned even as he imagined the laughter spreading through town by sundown. He climbed into his rusted truck and drove out of town, leaving the gossip behind. The road stretched long and lonely. Fields rolled past, wild and untended, nothing but weeds and broken fences. The sky shifted as he drove, clouds peeling back to reveal strips of pale. Finally stepped out onto the soft, damp earth. His boots sank into the grass. He reached out and touched the cold metal of the silo. Rust flaked beneath his fingertips like old scabs. The land was ruined. The buildings were broken. But it was his ruin, his brokenness to rebuild. That night, back in his rented room, he lay awake staring at the ceiling. He saw visions behind his closed eyes. The house standing tall again, fields cleared and green, the barn rebuilt. And always, at the center of it all, the towering silo. It didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a test. When he finally drifted off to sleep, the deed lay beneath his pillow, fragile and creased. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, Micah Hale would walk onto that land not as a hired hand, but as an owner. And he swore to himself that no storm, no man, and no laughter would ever drive him away. The next morning, Micah rose before dawn. The deed lay on his table, its edges curled from being gripped too tightly. Black letters, still sharp, told a truth that both thrilled and terrified him. This land was his. He drank bitter coffee fast, barely tasting it, then grabbed his oldest work clothes and drove toward the property. The truck rattled along the broken road, headlights cutting through mist. As the first light touched the horizon, the farm came into view. In daylight, the ruin looked even worse. The house was a shell, The barn sagged lower than he remembered. The tall grass rippled like a sea of whispers, hiding snakes, holes, and who knew what else. And at the center of it all, the silo loomed like a silent giant, its rusted skin glowing faintly red in the morning sun. Micah parked by the collapsed fence and climbed out with a shovel in one hand and a borrowed scythe in the other. The air was cold and damp. The silence felt unnatural, broken only by the distant caw of a crow. He started small. The yard closest to the house was littered with nails, child's toy car, faded blue, missing 2 wheels, glass bottles that caught the sunlight like jewels. Each item whispered of the families who had lived here, who had laughed and fought and vanished, leaving only scraps behind. Micah collected these fragments carefully, setting them in a box in his truck bed. Worthless to anyone else, they felt priceless to him. Proof that this land had once been alive, and could be again. Days blurred together. Work at dawn, collapse at dusk. The once wild fields began to reveal old patterns. Stone paths half buried in soil. Ghostly rows where gardens had once grown. As Micah cleared more space, he felt the land breathe under his hands. It was changing. And so was he. But the silo never changed. It loomed at the edge of every task, untouched and watching. When the wind passed through its broken seams, it made a deep, resonant hum that seemed almost like words in a forgotten language. Micah told himself it was just metal and wind, but he never fully believed it. In town, people still laughed. At the diner, bets were placed on how long he would last before giving up. Whispers followed him in the hardware store. Some voices were mocking, others pitying, none of them kind. Micah didn't answer. He worked instead. Every swing of the scythe, every shovel of dirt was his answer. But while his determination grew, his savings dwindled. Nails, gas, food, everything cost money. And money was nearly gone. One night, sitting by the dying light of a kerosene lamp, he counted his last bills and faced a hard truth. If he couldn't bring in cash soon, all his effort would end. His eyes kept drifting to the window. Beyond the dark fields, he could see the outline of the silo, black against the moonlit sky. Rusted steel. Tons of it. Scrap metal still had value. Micah swallowed hard. The decision came slow but steady. The town thought the silo would crush him. Instead, he would tear it down, P-form. Up close, it was even more imposing. The steel sheets stretched high into the sky, their seams thick with rust, their edges jagged like the teeth of some long-dead beast. The structure groaned faintly in the wind, a sound too deep, too alive. Micah circled it slowly, studying every bolt, every weakness. He marked spots where the metal had thinned, where bolts jutted out loose and crooked. Here he would begin. He gripped the crowbar tight and slammed it into the first seam. The sound that followed was not what he expected. It didn't clang. It rang. Deep, resonant, like a massive bell tolling across the empty fields. The vibration shot up his arms, rattling his bones. Micah froze, breath caught in his throat. The echo rolled outward and seemed to linger in the air, as though the silo itself had been waiting for someone to wake it. Finally, he forced himself to move. With a grunt, he drove the crowbar into the seam again and pried hard. Rust flaked away, raining down in orange powder. The metal screamed as it gave way. And then, with a shudder, a small section near the base peeled open, revealing a narrow, dark gap. The smell hit him first. It wasn't just rust or wet grain. It was older, earthier, like damp soil sealed away for decades. Micah grabbed the lantern from his truck and crouched beside the opening. He hesitated for one heartbeat, then flicked the lantern on and shoved it inside. The beam cut through swirling dust. For a moment, all he saw was rot and decay. Piles of ruined grain, broken boards, fragments of old wood. Exactly what he expected. Then the light shifted, and something gleamed. Micah's breath caught. He pushed the lantern deeper and saw shapes that didn't belong. Wooden crates, stacked clumsily in the far corner, their edges blackened with age. A canvas tarp slumped beside them, stiff and brittle but intact. Beneath it, something metallic reflected the light, like a secret refusing to stay. Labels still legible through the rust. Micah's pulse thundered in his ears. He staggered to a tarp, yanked it aside, and stumbled back in shock. Beneath it lay pieces of motorcycles. Engines dismantled, wheels stacked in careful piles, cracked leather seats curling like old paper. And in the farthest corner, against the curved wall, a single chest sat waiting. Its lid was warped, swollen shut. Micah jammed the crowbar beneath it and heaved. With a splintering crack, the chest opened. Inside lay a leather-bound book, its cover cracked but whole. Micah lifted it reverently and opened the first page. A name stared back at him, a name he recognized from whispers in town. The family who had once owned this land. A family spoken of only in rumors. The handwriting that followed was wild and uneven, snatches of deals made in shadows, engines bought by the dozens, fears of neighbors asking questions, men arriving in the dead of night. Micah's skin crawled. This wasn't just junk. It wasn't abandoned equipment or farm trash. This was a vault. A place built to hide. Someone had locked away a secret here, and Micah had just torn the door open. He stumbled back through the gap and stared up at the silo towering over him. The wind howled through its seams, almost like a voice whispering in rage. Micah realized the truth with a shiver. He hadn't just found scrap metal. He had found a story. And now he was part of it. The discovery haunted Micah. That night he barely slept. When he closed his eyes, he saw the helmets stacked like skulls, the rifles lined in neat rows, the cracked leather seats of motorcycles curling like dried leaves. And the diary. Always the diary. The words inside it whispered of a past built on fear and secrecy, of deals struck under moonlight, of neighbors who asked too many questions, of men who came and went in silence. Micah read by lamplight until his eyes ached, but the meaning never became clear. The memory of those silent figures he'd once glimpsed at sunset came roaring back. This wasn't just idle curiosity anymore. It was hunger, maybe even warning. From that moment, Micah's work grew urgent. He no longer cleared the land just to rebuild. He cleared to protect. Each relic he found inside the silo, he carried carefully to his truck and drove to a small shed he'd rented on the outskirts of town, a place no one would think to look. Inside the shed, he began arranging them like pieces of a puzzle. Photographs, tools, fragments of engines, stacks of documents wrapped in brittle wax paper. Every item told a piece of the story, and together they painted a picture Micah could barely comprehend. The diary never left his side. At night he read it obsessively, following the voice of the long-dead owner. The writing shifted between pride and paranoia. Lines about shipments arriving under cover of darkness. Notes on men who asked questions, then disappeared. Fevered passages about keeping the collection safe at all costs. Micah felt the weight of that fear pressing into his chest. He wasn't just dealing with old junk. This was something dangerous. Something people had killed to protect. The weather changed as if to match his mood. Storm clouds gathered low on the horizon, bruised and heavy. The wind sharpened, turning each gust into a warning howl through the jagged seams of the silo. The whole structure groaned, as though it knew its time was running out. Micah paced the floor of his small house, staring out at the dark sky. He told himself the silo had stood for decades. It would survive this storm too. But unease gnawed at him. If the structure collapsed, the relics inside would be buried forever. The diary, the photographs, the truth. He couldn't let that happen. By nightfall, the storm broke. Rain came first, a steady, cold curtain that soaked the fields and turned the dirt lanes to mud. Then came the wind, roaring like a beast, tearing at the few standing walls of the barn. Lightning split the sky, and for an instant the silo appeared whole again. Chamber and began hauling relics out, one armful at a time. The diary first. Then the photographs, sealed in fragile envelopes. Letters, bound in twine. Tools, pieces of engines. Each trip was harder than the last. The floor sagged under his weight, threatening to give way entirely. A beam snapped with a sound like a gunshot, crashing to the ground inches from his head. Still, Micah didn't stop. His muscles burned, lungs heaving. He staggered through sheets of rain, loaded the truck bed, then plunged back into the storm again and again. At last, with his strength nearly spent, he seized one final bundle wrapped in stiff cloth and stumbled toward the door. Lightning struck, turning the night white. For a heartbeat, the silo looked alive again, a towering monument, defiant and whole. Then the vision shattered. With a moan that sounded almost like a sigh, the structure gave way. The roof caved inward, walls folded like paper. Steel screamed as it tore apart, raining debris into the hollow interior. Micah dove clear, clutching the final bundle to his chest. When he turned back, the giant was gone, reduced to twisted wreckage sinking into the mud. He stood in the downpour, chest heaving, water streaming from his face. The storm raged on, but his focus was on the truck bed behind him, piled high with the fragments of history he'd managed to save. Behind him, decades of secrets were swallowed by darkness and rain. Dawn came slow and grey. The storm clouds thinned, then broke apart, revealing a pale, washed-out sky. Steam rose from the wreckage of the silo, curling into the cold morning air like ghostly fingers. The towering giant was gone. Where it had stood for decades, only a twisted heap of rusted steel remained, sinking deeper into the mud with each groan and creak. Micah stood ankle-deep in muck, staring at the ruin. The silence was deafening. No hum of wind through jagged seams, no low metallic moan. Just the occasional drip of rainwater and the distant secrets buried here still had a voice. By midday, the townsfolk began to appear. Trucks slowed on the road, drivers leaning out their windows to gawk at the ruin. Some shook their heads in mock sympathy. Others just laughed, their voices carrying on the wind. A few stopped to speak, offering shallow condolences. Their eyes weren't on Micah, though. They were on the tarp in the back of his truck. Hungry, curious. Micah gave them nothing. He didn't speak of the relics or the storm inside the silo's walls. He only said what they wanted to hear, that the silo was old, that it was bound to fall sooner or later, that he was lucky to have survived. Let them think he was just a fool standing in the mud. Let them gossip. The truth was his alone. Later that week, Micah rented a small storage shed on the far edge of town. It wasn't much, just 4 walls, a roof that didn't leak, and a single heavy lock. But it was dry, safe. One by one, he carried the relics inside and arranged them with quiet reverence. The diary lay open on a table, its pages carefully dried and pressed flat. The photographs were spread in rows, blurry faces staring back through the haze of time. Tools and engine parts were stacked neatly along the walls, waiting like silent witnesses. In that shed, Micah felt something unexpected. Purpose. What began as a desperate attempt to own land had become something far greater. He wasn't just rebuilding a farm anymore. He was guarding a story. A legacy that had chosen him. At night, he sat with the diary, the lantern casting long shadows across the walls. The dead man's handwriting told of obsession, collecting, hoarding, hiding, trades made in darkness, fears that never faded. Secrets kept so tightly they had to be buried in steel and silence. Micah felt the pull of that same darkness, the desire to hide, to protect, to never let anyone see. But unlike the man before him, Micah didn't want to hoard the past. He wanted to preserve it, to bring it into the light so it could never be buried. Wreckage was sinking into the earth now, swallowed slowly by weeds and time. He held the diary in his hands, the cracked leather warm against his palms. The setting sun painted the sky in streaks of fire. The light caught the ruined metal, making it glow one last time before darkness claimed it. For the first time in years, Micah felt at peace. The land was his. The story was his. The responsibility was his. As the evening wind rose, carrying the last echoes of laughter away, Micah understood. He hadn't just inherited a farm. He had inherited a destiny. And he would make sure the world remembered.